I shared a video highlighting my experience at the Sonic Symphony. It took me over a year to make that video, so I thought it would be fun to share the behind-the-scenes process, sharing how the story was written out, how the storyboards were created and used as visual aid to help enhance the story, and then ultimately how everything was put together in editing to create the video. The process begins now. It's the Lily factor. Ding! Every story starts with the story. Wow! Wow! After the show, when we were in Texas, I brought this book with me, which is my idea book, I guess. I just write like miscellaneous ideas I have when I'm traveling for storylines, and I just plop it in here full of proprietary goodness. This is a top secret idea, so guys, please don't steal this idea from me, okay? So when I was with family and they were prepping for the funeral and stuff, or just visiting, there would be lulls, and so during that time I would write down all the moments and memories from the show, which I'm not going to show all of it because sometimes it's my personal thoughts. It's like a diary entry basically, but I didn't really use this as a resource until I had already finished most of the script, and then I checked back in this book of everything I'd written down from every last detail to make sure there wasn't anything in the story I forgot. But the story that I almost forgot to add into the video that I'm glad I wrote it down here was me talking about how at the Sonic 3 medley, Super Sonic was about to get punched. And so I thought that was so funny, and I'm glad I wrote that down. There's even some stuff that didn't make it into the video for the story, like how they played Believe in Myself from one of Tails' themes in the symphonic portion, and they showed Tails throw a guy in the water, and everyone was really cheering for that. This book, where I write my video ideas, I wrote a whole slew of just jokes for this particular video. So in my own time outside of that, I would just have funny ideas of references I could make and jokes, and so I just started spitting it all out on here. And then, just other other ideas. I had a lot of jokes and ideas. Some more random ideas. So these two books I would use as a reference guide when writing the script. I mean, most of the time I had all this stuff pretty much down in my head when writing the script, but once I would finish an outline or whatever, then I would go to these books and make sure that there wasn't anything I left out that I wanted to add. We had our notes, we had the whole story written out on paper, then it was time to actually write the script, so we go to my little final draft 13 here. Basement Dwelling Gamer Sonic Symphony Experience. Yeah, that was gonna be the first title. Very long title. Wireless keyboard here, and I just be typing all my good stuff. I am what I've heard described as a berserker ninja writer, so I just kind of free flow, let the silliness come out, although I did have many jokes already mentally memorized and prepared to use for this video, but there were a lot of jokes that just got added by the spontaneity of typing on my keyboard. Once we had that script written out, then it was up to me reading it out loud, see if it sounded right, and then fixing accordingly if words just didn't land as funny verbally out loud as they did in my head. We got this book right here. This is where I do a lot of my storyboarding work for clients and for personal projects. I have a nice little labeling system here that'll help move us along to where we need to be, which is the Sonic Symphony section. I just went ahead and slammed that script in the sketchbook and paperclipped the thing. It was a total of how many pages did we end up doing? We had 24 pages, and as you can see, even when I finished writing the script, I was still not done with the script because I needed an ending, and I found the perfect way to tie in all of the jokes even after I wrote the script. You can write the location of things and what action is going to happen, and that can help clue in for the storyboards what I would be drawing. But since I know a lot of what I had in mind for this, I didn't do a whole lot of that, with the exception of if I felt things were really important to clarify or it had to do with something I needed to create when I was editing. There's also just a lot of this where we just have nothing but what I'm saying. Because, with scripts you have so much room. I mean, it's specifically for that, to add notes, to help me in the storyboarding side of things. And so what ended up happening is I would number a sequence of things I was going to storyboard relating to a specific section of the story. And then what would happen is I would draw out the thumbnails for that particular sequence, all connected to that, for the specific storyboards. And then I'd even label like what specifically these had to do with what thing in the dialogue. And so it's my literal like code to myself. I mean, no one else except for close friends and family will understand what I mean by Job stance. Yeah, that's a Superbook reference, ironically. I would also list, B-roll for things that would either involve footage of me at the show, at the concert, or just whatever else I had in mind. And then there were times that I had already done the storyboards even before I had written out the script. So there was that little brief moment of sigh of relief, joy, glee that I already knocked out those boards, because once these numbers started to just increase significantly, the stress level of how many boards I was gonna have to do also increased significantly. Yeah, we had a lot to do. Nothing gave me more joy than to reach the end board. Or to end board. The other thing that's really good about just thumbnailing for the storyboards first is you just get the rough idea. You don't have to take too much time detailing it. It just gives you a basic idea of what it would look like. But when you're doing it really rough too, it makes things very funny and expressive. So I remember really getting a kick out of this particular drawing of the Sonic fan guy. And so after that, it just inspired how I would draw him. So instead of him being kind of more normal and human, like, I would just draw him looking all silly like this. Even to the point where the actual, like, cover for the video, the thumbnail for the video, he has that same kind of facial expression. So I initially wanted to do something where, like, the video ends and I'd have, like, a score count referencing the Sonic score when you complete a level, and then just, like, number all of the verbal references I made to the franchise and visual references I made within storyboards and such. But I realized that would take way too much time and confuse people, and so yeah, I didn't end up doing that, so that was scrapped. And then we got the little added part with the extra boards. We got the whole script there of those characters interacting. There were quite a few storyboards I had done even before I wrote out the script, just because I had joke ideas that were so funny that I was like, no, we gotta go ahead and board these out. So some of the first ones I did were actually compiled right here. How very convenient for me. But this was like long before I actually started storyboarding for the video, before the script was written, and I had already done some boards. So then when we actually had the script written out and all the thumbnails for the storyboards done, what I did was I took really low quality, crusty JPEG pictures of all of these thumbnails and I pasted them into just one big canvas in Procreate. And I had written out how many boards needed to be done versus how many boards I had done. And then you can see too, there's lots of scrapped boards that I didn't end up wanting to add, so I would just scribble them out so that I knew not to even acknowledge those. And then every time I completed a board, I would write an X. And so what I tried to do was just maintain doing the numerical sequences to keep my sanity, because knowing that I did a sequence helped keep the art consistent, helped me feel like I was actually making progress, all that good stuff. I remember the amount of glee and success I felt just knowing, like, when I'd fully completed a page. Oh, and you can see me counting these out too to make sure that I didn't miss any numbers. X's would increase and the number would increase. This helped me keep my sanity and know that I was actually on my way to being productive. After leaving the symphony show, I knew I wanted to make a video about it. And it took over a year to make, but while part of me was frustrated that it took me that long to make the video after seeing the show, there was another part of me that knew it was for the best, because there were so many jokes and references that I thought of over the duration of wanting to make this video that those jokes wouldn't have happened otherwise had I not taken so long to make the video. And so while initially these first storyboards you're seeing created were the first round of boards I did around the earliest phases of me wanting to make this video, I had not written out the script for the video yet. As time went on, I started to realize that I had so many jokes that I wanted visual gags to go with that I needed a script that would better organize the sequence of everything and help me organize what boards I needed to do accordingly. While I had a vague idea of what I was getting into and how difficult it would be, I still had no idea what I was getting into and how difficult it would be. There was a constant battle of just, especially on the storyboard side, of how I should go about it, what would be most time efficient. I wanted to make sure that everything read as clearly as possible. When it comes to storyboarding, how polished a board is really depends on the project and your deadline, what the project demands. So I wouldn't go as far as to say that storyboards have to look as polished as what I did for this particular video. The reason I made the boards as polished as I did is I knew I wasn't going to be doing any type of animation over said storyboards. These boards were going to be the standalone thing the audience is going to see. I wanted to make sure that they read as clearly as possible, that every punchline or thing I wanted to show the audience could read as clearly as it could, so that nothing went over people's heads or got lost in translation. The ways I went about that involved not having super sketchy boards, so it doesn't mean I had to have perfect polished line art over the drawings, but at least enough to where you don't see the big old circle in the middle of the forehead of the character. Of course, it also involves some good foundational stuff, biting by rule of thirds, good camera angles, directional lines that draw your eye to where it needs to go, but the biggest thing I took advantage of was tone, making sure that everything was shaded in a way that what I wanted to stand out stood out. And I typically used about 5 grayscale tones to achieve that. I would add a bit of light to some of the boards, not shading, just lighting, some white light here and there. Because I was always working in grayscale, I would take total advantage of any chance I got to use color in the boards. So this particular board, I wanted it to be very clear that my mom and I were wearing Sonic shirts, so that the Harry Potter accusations, they just didn't land as well when you could clearly see Sonic on our shirts. And then of course I designed my little BetterHelp logo parody for another particular gag. Having the color for those particular boards just helped communicate the story better and gave me a nice break and chance to add some color, since I am absolutely addicted to color. I even used a limited color scheme though for the "You Need Help" logo. I had the idea of doing like the cuckoo hand signals around the logo, and so I couldn't resist making that one happen. At the beginning stages of my storyboarding, I didn't always do the boards in order. I would maintain trying to do a sequence of storyboards, but it wasn't always a sequence following the previous sequence of storyboards, but maybe a sequence a little further down in the script, if that makes sense. I didn't spend a lot of time boarding just at the beginning. It was pretty sparse and spaced out, where I'd work on some boards for several hours, and then I wouldn't do any boarding for several months. I didn't know how timing worked when it came to how long one should actually work on a board, how long it should take, if I was taking too long, if I wasn't taking long enough, although I never really worried about that. But it was difficult trying to figure out a lot of things. I didn't know if it was faster for me to just polish a sketch I did for storyboard or to just go over that sketch with line work. What was going to be faster? What worked better? I didn't really figure out a full rhythm of what was best for pacing when it came to storyboards until much later in the game. How it ended up happening was, it was getting closer to the end of the year, and I did not want this video project to spill into another year. I had already done the work of the script and thumbnailing for the storyboards and done some storyboards, so I thought I can't really quit on this project now because I've pretty much committed to it. It shouldn't really be something I give up on now. And so it was getting closer to the end of the year, and I was determined to finish. Nothing was going to distract me, except when Procreate updated and gave me new brushes, and I was testing those out instead of working on this board. One of the blessings in disguise was that I was dealing with chronic depression during the time of trying to finish up the boards. And why that was a blessing in disguise is because I couldn't really motivate myself to do anything. I was depressed, I was tired all the time, and so due to my brain just always constantly being wired of do something, I couldn't just, sit in my bed and stare at the ceiling all the time, so at least I could sit in my bed and work on storyboards instead. There's some productivity to appease my brain. So I had a lot of dwell time to just work on boards nonstop. And so because I was absolutely determined to not deal with the crushing defeat of letting the project spill into another year, and I had depression mixed into it, it ended up being that the last final stretch of storyboards, I would work on storyboards for like 8 to 10 hours every day because I had so much uninterrupted time to work on my storyboards nonstop. I finally started to figure out my rhythm and some methods that helped me when it came to storyboarding. So I'm now going to share the fudge recipe, as it were. Before any methods of improving speed for storyboards or anything, one of the biggest chunks of advice I'd give is to not get so overly critical or get caught in the perfectionism trap. A lot of the time, if I got too daunted by how many characters were in a board or how complex the background was, I'd start to get bogged down by all the little details and freak out and spend way too much time on a board. I couldn't figure out if it was better to import the thumbnails as a base sketch for the boards or just use them as a reference for the boards. And like I said, I just get bogged down by the details, but I slowly started to figure out that when it comes to storyboarding, there is a method used in order to get all of everything you need out efficiently and then come back to it to polish it and make it more clear, read better, is this thing we call roughs for storyboards. And now you're going to see what my process for roughs looked like. It meant doing really light, loose, free-flowing sketches to get the basic idea of what was going on in the scene without getting bogged down by the details. Roughs would take 2 to 4 minutes per board, and it was helpful in that I didn't get stressed about the details, and I was able to quickly move on to the next board without overthinking anything. It made it easier going back to polish the board because I wasn't spending too much time on one board trying to think, is this funny enough? Does this read clearly? Is the perspective right? Is the background right? Do the characters look right? On and on and on and on and on. I had my thumbnails as a reference guide, so I didn't have to think too hard about where the characters were positioned, what the angle looked like. So with all those things in mind, it helped making the roughs go by really quickly, and then it made it easier for me to polish the boards. Then I figured out with roughs, because the sketches were so light and loose, instead of polishing the sketches, because, I was like, oh, they're good enough, I can just polish them, maybe that's what I should do, because they were now roughs, I would go over it with line work, and it actually ended up being a lot faster for me than just polishing a really polished sketch for a storyboard. By doing the roughs, it actually helped me work a lot faster. I also noticed my line work improved significantly in speed, but I will say I use the term line work very loosely. We're not talking really beautiful polished line work. We're just talking about outlining something so you can tell what's in the scene. By spending so much time in that final stretch, dedicating several hours every day working on the boards, by doing it so often and so regularly, that also helped improve my speed a lot. It went from the very beginning of working on storyboards. It took probably between an hour to an hour and 40 minutes on the board. And when I got to that final stretch and I figured out methods that worked and everything, there was actually a point in time where I got a board done in 20 minutes. I was giddy. But I typically got my boards done between 30 and 40 minutes. That does include the time spent on the roughs, but not on the thumbnails. I was not clocking myself on thumbnails at that time, so I do not remember how long it took. But I would definitely say roughs was such a helpful and crucial part in terms of storyboarding. Because, like I said, the biggest thing is you can't spend so much time getting bogged down by the details or trying to make it look perfect. It's about communicating the story. That's why it's called storyboard. The story is the most important part, so you gotta make sure you're doing that right. It's not about making the drawings look beautiful or the characters look beautiful. It's just about, or the backgrounds look beautiful either. No, it's just about communicating the story clearly. I even made sure to make characters more distinctive, like shading out objects that characters were wearing, you know, making the sunglasses just completely shaded in or bags shaded in. Some characters that I wanted to be a little more distinctive from the rest, I would give dark hair, which was like the only additional shading I would give in tones for the characters, because most of the time the characters would just be one tone, and it was usually a tone much brighter than anything around them, unless there were background characters, then those guys would be darker in tone. Another facet for the boards was adding in Easter eggs, little jokes in there, even within the boards that people may not always see, but if you pause at the board and really zoom in and look around, you might find something hidden in there. Just have little jokes with myself too, like the Sonic fan guy. I don't know why, I just thought the way I drew him was so funny that I have him make some appearances throughout the boards, even when he's not directly involved in the story. And of course, I cannot call myself a Sonic fan without hiding a few Big the Cat drawings in some of the storyboards. If Sega does it, I does it. That's so bad. I have a lot of Easter eggs, a lot of referencing references. Anything to have some fun in there. A lot of the times too, depending on how I was feeling that day, I would deliberately pick working on boards that maybe didn't have that many characters in a scene or not too crazy of a background, and then save the more difficult boards with vehicles or more characters in a scene as kind of the last boards I do for the day. So that way I still felt productive, like I knocked out a lot of boards, but that I didn't have to start off with doing the hard board first and just completely deplete myself of motivation and energy. Finishing this project was honestly just an answer to prayer. I prayed to God a lot to help me finish making the storyboards and the video itself. There were some hard boards to draw, because often I'd find there were times when large crowds would be required at a board, and admittedly I'd stick with the old circle for a head method for that one. Yeah, work smarter, not harder. Yeah, crowds, fun. I think the boards I dreaded the most were anytime I had to draw someone inside a vehicle. Yeah, car interiors, when you're trying to make sure you can see both characters, but the perspective isn't weird. Yeah. This is my favorite board, by the way. The sketch was so goofy, and I tried to make sure the line art did it justice, and I think I did a pretty good job. I just love that it perfectly captures that, like, eager and earnest, but also kind of uncomfortably weird face. But I shouldn't say it's my favorite board. I have a lot of favorite boards. There were a lot of ones that surprised me, that some that I thought would be difficult actually were a lot of fun, and then some that I thought would be super easy were the ones that I was like, ugh. I'm so grateful I was actually able to finish this project and take care of that final stretch of drawing. I remember after it was done, I just found that I was drawing so much faster after that. I was like getting on Magma and drawing with other artists, and they're like, whoa, you're drawing really fast there. And I was like, if you only knew what I'd been up to in the past few weeks. There's something magical about artistry when you stop overthinking and getting in your head and you just kind of go for it. It's powerful. It's very powerful. Before I had even started editing the final video, whenever I finished some storyboards, I would go over to my editing software and I would put all the storyboards in there and start to arrange them together to make sure that they actually flowed correctly. There's an art to the flow of a story, and I wanted to make sure that that flow was nice and seamless. And so that would actually help me sometimes with working on storyboards. I would tweak them after going into editing and seeing how they looked all arranged together, make sure everything balanced with consistency. I worked in Procreate to make these boards, so I didn't have like a specific storyboarding software that I could have all of the like completed boards, you know, to look at all together in one sequence. So there were even times where I had some boards that were still featuring the same background and the same scene, and those times I would sometimes use the already completed storyboard with lightened opacity as like a reference sketch to make sure things looked consistent. And then having all of those boards already in the editing software, when it was all said and done, I was able to look through all the boards and make sure that consistency was there, that a character wearing sunglasses on their head was wearing sunglasses for every shot they needed to be wearing sunglasses. So that helped me make sure that there weren't any consistency errors for anything. And to help me pre-visualize the story when I had all the boards together, I still had like the animated intro in there and some other things that I knew were going to be in the intro. And then I went ahead and already started doing like some animation editing effects for some of the boards that needed it, some additional captions for boards, temporary filler scenes so that I knew what transition I wanted between a board and a scene, and also any other types of transitions and keyframes zooming in on boards, all before I'd even started editing the video. And then one other thing I did was adjustment keyframes, changing the hues. That was specifically for anytime there were glow sticks in boards. Since those were colored, I wanted to give the illusion that the glow sticks were changing colors, so I used a keyframe to change the hue of those glow sticks. Then for a particular scene where my sister and I are seeing the glow of flames from on stage, I had a separate individual image of the glow of the flames, and I used an opacity keyframe to make the flames kind of come in and out of glowing to give off that illusion that without, you just have bright orange on myself and my sister. Once the boards were edited to my liking, I did the voiceover reading off of the script, though sometimes ad-libbing from the script, and I inserted blank scenes between the storyboards so that everything was arranged with my voiceover correctly, and then I would insert B-roll footage, be that the footage I had edited separately of me drawing some of the fans at the Sonic Symphony, or B-roll footage of me at the actual concert show. And so those would replace the blank scenes in my editing. Sometimes it got tedious though, because I would have to manually swipe through the timeline of the footage and make sure I landed on the right spot. That way I wouldn't end up showing the same drawing footage between storyboards. That got tedious, but I had actually done the final cover for the video, the thumbnail for the video, which you're seeing being drawn out right here. I finished that before I had finished editing the video, and I had so much fun making this cover that it actually motivated me to finish editing the video, because I was like, look at this, I want people to see this, I finally did it, I finished it, and so that helped me just kind of grind through and finish the editing. I remember there was one day I spent way too much time editing the video that my parents were like, how's the video coming along? Are we gonna see it soon? And I was like, I don't even know if this is good anymore. Ugh. But then the next day I went over my footage and I was like, oh, nope, I like this. This is funny. Yeah. So with a year of jokes in the making that were just too good to ignore, I finished my Sonic Symphony story video with all 168 storyboards featured inside. It was a lot of work, but I had a lot of fun making it. So thank you for watching the original video if you did that, and thank you for watching the process video. I hope you enjoyed it. May God bless you in your life and your art. Bye!